You didn't plan that fifth trade. You barely remember deciding to take it. One moment you're watching a chart, calm enough, and the next your hand is already clicked, and some quieter part of you is asking what you just did. If that's ever happened to you, you're not undisciplined. You're caught in something far older than trading. And by the end of this, you'll understand exactly what it is and why almost nobody warns you about it. Here's a question worth sitting with for a second. Why does the fifth trade of the day always feel different from the first? Same screen, same hands, same person. So why does discipline hold for one and dissolve for the other? Keep that question in your pocket because the answer isn't what you think, and it explains almost every overtrading spiral that's ever wrecked an account. Most traders assume overtrading is a willpower problem. Not enough discipline, not enough patience, need to try harder tomorrow. That explanation feels true in the moment, mostly because it's the story that hurts the least. But it's wrong, and believing it is exactly why the pattern keeps repeating. Overtrading isn't a failure of character. It's a completely predictable output of how your nervous system handles unresolved emotional charge. Once you see the actual mechanism, the fifth trade stops being a mystery. Start with what a single trade actually does to your body. Not your account, your body. The moment you enter a position, your brain treats the uncertainty the same way it treats any unresolved threat, with a low hum of activation that doesn't fully switch off until the trade closes. Win or loss, something in you needed that resolution. If the outcome felt satisfying, the hum settles. If it didn't, if the win felt too small or the loss felt undeserved, the activation doesn't clear. It just sits there looking for the next trade to discharge itself into. This is where psychologist Antonio Damasio becomes useful, even though his research had nothing to do with markets. Damasio studied patients with damage to a small region of the brain responsible for linking emotion to decision-making and found something counterintuitive. These patients didn't become better decision-makers once emotion was reduced. They became catastrophically worse, endlessly deliberating over simple choices, unable to commit to anything. His conclusion was that emotion isn't the enemy of good decisions. It's the mechanism that lets you stop deciding and act. The felt sense of a decision being resolved, what he called a somatic marker, is what lets your brain close a loop and move on. Now apply that to trading. A clean, well-executed trade, win or loss, gives your brain a resolved feeling. An early exit, a forced entry, a trade you already knew was wrong the moment you clicked, gives you an outcome without resolution. The position is closed, the feeling isn't. And an unresolved feeling doesn't just sit quietly. It goes looking for another shot at closure, and the fastest way to manufacture that feeling is to open another trade. That's the fifth trade. It was never really about the setup on the chart. It was your nervous system trying to finish something the fourth trade left open. Here's the part that makes this worse instead of better. The market doesn't care how emotionally unresolved you are. It has no obligation to hand you the clean, satisfying outcome your body is asking for. So you take the fifth trade chasing resolution, and it often creates more unresolved charge instead of less, which is exactly how a single early loss turns into a full afternoon of increasingly reckless clicking. Each trade is less about the market and more about trying to outrun a feeling that entering another trade cannot actually fix. Notice something else about this pattern while we're here. It rarely announces itself as panic. Panic would be easy to catch. What it actually feels like most of the time is a strange, low-grade restlessness. A sense that sitting still and doing nothing is somehow the wrong move, even when doing nothing is exactly what your own plan calls for. That restlessness isn't boredom, and it isn't excitement either. It's your nervous system quietly campaigning for one more shot at closure, dressed up as a legitimate setup so you don't notice what's actually driving the click. Why does this spiral so rarely show up on day one, when the loss is small and the emotional charge should be easy to shake off? This is where a second piece of research fills in the gap. Economist and psychologist George Loewenstein spent years studying what he called the risk as feelings hypothesis, and it directly contradicts how most trading education still gets taught. The standard model assumes people weigh risk mathematically, calculating probability and expected value like a spreadsheet. Loewenstein's research found something different. In moments of emotional arousal, people don't consult their calculated risk assessment at all. They act on the immediate feeling in the room, even when that feeling flatly contradicts what they know to be true on a calm day. Not because they're bad at math, because in an aroused state, feeling and reasoning are running on almost entirely separate tracks, and feeling wins. That's the piece that explains why you can know your rules perfectly and still break every one of them by trade 6. Knowledge lives in the calm state track. The trade you're about to take lives in the aroused state track. And once you're aroused enough, from a loss, from a near miss, from 4 unresolved trades stacked on top of each other, the 2 tracks stop talking to each other entirely. So, here's the honest, less comfortable version of the question we started with. It was never really about the 5th trade. It's about every trade before it that ended without closure, quietly building a pressure your conscious rules were never designed to override. If any of this is landing, if you felt that exact hand already clicked moment before, this is a good point to hit like and subscribe, because we're about to get into what actually breaks the pattern and you won't want to miss it. So what do you actually do with a nervous system that manufactures its own excuses to keep clicking? The instinct is to add more rules, a stricter stop loss, a harder daily trade limit, a louder inner voice telling you to stop. Almost none of that works for long, and now you know exactly why. You're trying to solve a felt sense problem with a logical patch, applying calm state reasoning to a system that's already switched tracks. It's like trying to talk someone out of a fever. The rule isn't wrong, it's simply speaking a language the aroused state has already stopped listening to. What actually works is smaller and stranger than a rule. It's a deliberate closure ritual, something physical and specific enough to register as an ending, performed immediately after every single trade, win or loss. Standing up, writing one honest sentence about what happened, stepping away from the screen for even 90 seconds. None of these change the outcome of the trade. What they do is give your nervous system the resolved feeling a rushed, uncertain exit failed to provide, so it stops manufacturing a reason to open the next position just to chase that feeling somewhere else. This is also why professional traders, the ones who actually last, tend to look almost boringly ritualistic up close. Not because ritual is trendy, because they learned, usually the expensive way, that discipline isn't a personality trait you either have or don't. It's a closed loop, built one deliberate ending at a time, so the next trade gets to start clean instead of starting as a search party for yesterday's unfinished feeling. Think back to that first question. Why does the 5th trade feel different from the first? Now you know. The first trade starts with a clear head. The 5th trade starts carrying whatever the 4th never got to finish. Close the loop after every single trade, and there's nothing left over for the 5th one to inherit. You didn't plan that 5th trade, because some part of you was still finishing the 4th. Now you know what that feeling actually is, and more importantly, you know it's not a character flaw, it's a mechanism, and mechanisms can be worked with. Close the loop today and see what trade 5 actually feels like when it isn't secretly trade 1 all over again. If this changed how you look at your next losing trade, let us know in the comments what your version of the 5th trade looks like. Hit like and subscribe for more of this.